Recently, I've been thinking a lot about the public perception of Sonic the Hedgehog. It started last year when I saw my physiotherapist. I'd been planning a trip to go to Japan, and one of the things I was gonna do in Japan was see the Sonic Symphony. My physiotherapist asked me what I was looking forward to the most in Japan, and the obvious answer was the Sonic Symphony. But before I answered, I hesitated for a bit, before telling him that I wasn't looking forward to anything in particular. I thought about that moment a lot, like why didn't I just tell him the truth? And after months and months of thinking about it, I finally came to a conclusion. Being a Sonic fan sucked ass. Looking back on my life before meeting a new group of people, I would always tell myself that I wasn't going to mention Sonic and that they wouldn't know that I love Sonic. Yeah, high school left me with some insecurities. I grew up in like a really clean type of family, so I wasn't really familiar with stuff like sex. So I guess I was also very adverse to those kind of topics, which labeled me as kind of like this innocent, very childish kind of guy. And if that was mainly kept to the sex stuff, then that would be no problem. But then it started getting to a point where it's like, oh, you're childish, and you also like Sonic, which is also childish. Which is insane to me because people don't just casually put in religious symbolism into a children's game, or have the plot revolve around a government-led genocide that they've been covering up for 50 years. But honestly, if it was just high school, that'd be fine. I can single out a few people who did this. It wasn't that big of a problem. On top of that, high school was a time where a lot of kids would feel that they need to be more mature. But at the same time, they're still kids, so they have a very poor grasp of what being mature is. But then I thought about elementary school. There's one interaction that stuck out in particular. I was like, what, 12 years old? My friend had let me borrow his Sonic Universe comic. It was one centered around Knuckles. And this kid, who was like significantly younger than me, came up to me and asked, "Isn't Sonic for little kids?" I was in like grade 7 at that point. This third grader came up to me and just dropped that on me. Like, what? There was also another interaction where we had to wear costumes. I made like a robot costume and put the Eggman logo on it. And when some random kid from my class saw the Eggman logo, they looked at me and they were like, "Really? Sonic?" Since when was being a Sonic fan like being black in 1830s America? But then you combine these experiences with actually being on the internet. Like, people had it out for Sonic, man. I started exploring the internet around 2014. That's when I actually made accounts and started interacting with people and engaging with the fan base. And yeah, I don't see it, guys. Like, what's wrong with Sonic fans? Like, I do get it. There are problems with every fan base, and Sonic has its own problems. But there was never anything that made Sonic's fan base worse than anything else. I guess let's start with the obvious, the game quality. People didn't like the games, so they saw the people who did like those games as lesser, inferior. And that's partially why people hate the Sonic fanbase, probably. But this is where I'm going to talk about my opinions on opinions. The quality of a piece of art is not subjective. It's very much objective, and I think that saying it's subjective undermines all the skill and effort that it takes to actually make video games or movies, etc. Rent-a-Girlfriend is not a bad manga because people collectively decided it was. Rent-a-Girlfriend is a bad manga because it just straight up sucks. There are objective qualities about it, like how the story doesn't move forward, that makes the series a bad series. Just because someone can enjoy it doesn't mean it's subjectively good. But I'm also not saying you can't enjoy it either. I don't think anyone should say Rent-a-Girlfriend is good. I don't think anyone is entitled to that opinion. But what you are entitled to is your own preferences. Remember that stating that you enjoyed something is not an opinion. That is stating a fact about your emotions. That is not an opinion. You're talking about yourself, not the art in question. And I'm not discouraging people from forming their own opinions either. There are lots of elements that go into good art, and because humans are flawed, we can't calculate the objective quality of art. We can calculate a general estimate, we can say something is good, but do we know how good it is? Can we pinpoint the exact out of 10 rating? Not really. So we should be able to have civil and constructive conversations around the quality of art. And there are also personal preferences. Maybe someone might find animation enough to stay engaged with the story. But I need a good story. I don't want to waste my time watching 3 seasons of an anime just because it has good animation for half the runtime. I'm looking at you, Demon Slayer. But there are moments at least when you can compare something relatively to something else. Like Rent-a-Girlfriend is obviously bad compared to a Hayao Miyazaki movie. That being said, I still enjoy watching Rent-a-Girlfriend more, because Hayao Miyazaki movies can be objectively aimless and a bit abstract. That doesn't make them bad movies, but I prefer an easier watch. And I can also acknowledge that Hayao Miyazaki is a much more skilled writer than whoever wrote Rent-a-Girlfriend. So what does this have to do with Sonic the Hedgehog? I think people's opinion of Sonic the Hedgehog has been warped. People's opinions of Sonic the Hedgehog is the reason why I don't believe people are entitled to their own opinions. Because, put it simply, they're straight up wrong. And I'm gonna get super pretentious right now, but unfortunately I think the biggest issue with Sonic the Hedgehog is media literacy. People for too long have just not understood what Sonic is. and this problem has rooted itself within the first Sonic game. In the game, if you don't touch the controller for long enough, Sonic will tap his foot impatiently. This is his iconic idle animation, and people have completely misinterpreted it. They interpreted Sonic as impatient, impulsive. But the simple fact is, Sonic's attitude is supposed to be more in line with Bill Clinton's get it done attitude. If you take a look at the context of Sonic the Hedgehog, the first video game, what's happening is that Sonic's friends had been captured and are being used as batteries for robots. Sonic is being impatient, yes, but not because he's impulsive or has a short attention span, it's because people are in danger. He was a nuanced character, but because all the American cartoons gave him a short attention span, that's what stuck. It's also the same deal with the gameplay. All the advertising made Sonic out to be like this fast character, his gameplay super fast, but when you actually play the first Sonic game, there are a lot of slow sections. There's a lot of traditional platforming. So now people suddenly think Sonic has to be fast. And Sonic Team didn't see Sonic as that way. He was simply just a character to push new ideas. That's why we have something like Big's fishing segments in Sonic Adventure or the Werehog. People don't like Big or the Werehog not because they're bad, but because they see Sonic as being fast, and when he's not fast, they get pissy. What's ironic is that Sonic represents freedom. So it basically goes against Sonic's entire life philosophy to say that he has to be this fast, funny cartoon mascot. And it's a shame too because Sonic Team put a lot of effort into creating Sonic's character so his gameplay could be that malleable. Like there were so many bad Sonic spin-offs back in the 90s. The point of Sonic was, yes, he was mainly a platformer, but he could be whatever he wanted. And by introducing a bunch of side characters or transformations for Sonic, it justifies Sonic's different gameplay styles even more. Now again, you're free to not enjoy something like the Werehog, but some people are just not educated enough to determine the quality of a video game, nor do they have the maturity to understand how they feel for some reason. People go into Sonic Unleashed expecting it to be fast, which is pretty stupid by the way, since the game is advertised with the Werehog mechanics and stuff front and center, so you know that it will be slow for part of the game. But people go into it expecting it's fast, are disappointed, and somehow because they thought it was something else, but it isn't that thing, that's apparently a bad thing. That makes the game bad itself. It's like going into a turn-based RPG and complaining it's turn-based. I do understand that Sonic Unleashed is dabbling in two different genres, but as I said, you should have known of these genres before you purchased the game. But what about the actual criticism about the Werehog? Okay, so I'm gonna be honest, I don't find the game that easy, but even if the game was that easy, it didn't deserve the backlash it received. It genuinely disheartens me when people make fun of the Werehog or its easy combat. When there's a Legend of Zelda game where Link turns into a straight up wolf, and Age of Calamity is straight up the easiest game I've ever played. Like, I'm being so real, Sonic Unleashed has more mechanical depth than Age of Calamity. Age of Calamity also had the same frame rate issues. Sonic Unleashed was such a pivotal moment in Sonic Team's history. They messed up so badly with Sonic 06, but with Unleashed they locked in hard, and no one appreciated it. I think Sonic Unleashed was the last AAA Sonic game, and if people put aside their biases to what Sonic should be and just looked at it for what it is, it would have been a lot more respected. And I think Sonic as a franchise would have kept growing, because even if Colors and Generations did well, they were smaller budget games. They lacked the ambition that Unleashed or the adventure games or even 06 had. And we didn't get that ambition back until Frontiers, which is still pretty janky because they were working on such a tight budget. The thing is, at least the Unleashed criticism isn't that bad because it was a completely different gameplay style. What irks me the most is when people start complaining about what Sonic already is. And the biggest example of that is when people complain that Sonic stories shouldn't be serious. But the thing is, Sonic has had serious stories since the original game. A lot of Sonic games have themes about environmentalism. Tails has a serious but also subtle character arc in Sonic 2. Sonic 3 begins with Eggman starting a forest fire. These games were light on story because there was no dialogue on the Genesis, but they were trying to tell a grand, ambitious story either way. Then we got the Knuckles story in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, which is an epilogue to the main story. And that naturally evolved into Sonic Adventure's 6-character campaign, where you have 6 different stories that all intersect. Like, it's not an exaggeration to say that Sonic Adventure is like a Tarantino film. You don't see that often in video games. It sets Sonic apart from the rest. When someone says that we've been trying to recapture an aspect of Sonic that was never there, they're objectively wrong, Brian from IGN. He is not entitled to that opinion. And because Sonic was meant to be an icon not just for kids, but they wanted adults to enjoy Sonic 2, they upped the maturity a bit. They told a darker story. Then they ramped it up in the sequel. It was a little bit more streamlined because there were only 2 stories, but there was still 6 playable characters. They told an even more serious story, and this time it wasn't just nature versus technology. It was freedom versus authority. And because Sonic was always meant to represent freedom from the beginning, Despite what a lot of people were saying, this wasn't a departure from what Sonic's identity was. This was the natural evolution for a series trying to grow up with its audience. And to continue these ambitious stories, you need more characters. Characters that you can also play as so you connect with them more. Sonic tries to be good, it tries to tell good stories and create compelling characters. Yet people discourage their creativity. They say, oh, it should only be Sonic and there should be no story. And it got so bad that they listened. They made Sonic Colors, they made Sonic 4, those got good reviews, not because they were genuinely good games, it's because those were the surface level elements that people were asking for. And you can see in these games like Secret Rings, like Sonic 4 Episode 1, they had better reviews than their sequels, despite the sequels being better games. Because the first time they're like, oh, this is exactly what Sonic should be, then when the sequel comes out they realize, oh wait, maybe these games are never good to begin with. And especially after seeing how well these new Pokemon games have been doing, it's become really clear to me Sonic has just been done so dirty. Pokemon games are awful now, but they aren't getting the same backlash that Sonic did. To be fair, Pokemon has stayed consistent in quality for a longer time than Sonic, so it's built up a lot more goodwill. But they've released 3 really bad games and a lackluster remake, and they still are making tons of money. I understand that Sega let Sonic down in the early 2000s, but when Sonic Unleashed came out, the players let Sonic down as well. But enough about the reception of the games, there's also another issue with being a Sonic fan, and that's the undeserved stigma that the fanbase carries around. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't interacting with the Sonic fanbase pre-2014. But like, when I was, there was like no problem. Again, Sonic's fanbase does have its problems, but every fanbase does. And it's not as bad as like Star Wars fans being racist. I tried to do some research about why people don't like the Sonic fanbase, and they fall into 3 categories. Number 1, it's not true. Number 2, 1 or 2 people did something bad, and for some reason that's affected the perception of the entire fanbase. Number 3, it is true, but it's a good thing, or other fandoms will have the same problem and no one will bat an eye. Okay, let's kick it off with a really good one. Sonic fans are autistic. Now, this technically goes into the wrong category, but I don't think it is wrong, if you get my drift. No, you don't get my drift. Let me explain myself. I think a lot of Sonic fans are autistic, but not because Sonic attracts autism. It's literally just because the whole world was brainwashed into hating him. A lot of people are sheeple, so they'll just follow what's popular, and it was popular to hate Sonic. So old fans started hating the series while potential new fans were scared away. So the people who stuck around tended to be children or autistic, because autistic people don't care what society thinks. I mean, I guess Sonic is a colorful cartoon character, so in certain ways it could attract autistic people, but not more than like Mario or Pokemon does. And it's not a bad thing either. The difference is that Mario and Pokemon have a really big mainstream fan base, so a lot of the autistic people are drowned out in those fan bases. That's just it. I don't think Sonic has a special relationship with autism at all. And then another complaint I hear is like 2 sides of the same coin. It's either Sonic fans are too whiny, they complain too much, or they're too defensive over their games. And yeah, it's like, which one is it, guys? I think both are untrue though. Sonic fans will complain if a game is bad, and they will praise it and defend it if a game is good. That's as simple as that. I hear a lot about the green eyes debate, and I don't even know if it's like real. People always bring it up. It's like, remember when everyone was complaining about green eyes? No, I don't remember. I've never experienced this in my life. I do know that Sonic fans have been complaining about his quill's length, which, I mean, I think it's fair. I think it's a fair complaint. His model's ugly now. Like, again, like I said, they complain when there's something to complain about, and its quill length sucks. In reality, it's always been the mainstream audience that have been the whiners. They always complain about stupid stuff like the story, as I've already explained before. Some Call Me Johnny has a review on Sonic Unleashed back when it came out, and he said that most of the fan base actually liked the game while the mainstream audience was hating it. And it's not like Sonic fans didn't hate 06, so I don't know where this whiny or super defensive opinion comes from. And sure, Sonic fans don't defend every single game that comes out, but they do get defensive about the games they do like. But it's also hard to blame them because it was cool to hate Sonic at some point. Like, yeah, of course you'd get defensive after being attacked for so many years. I think it's kind of dumb that Sonic fans like to complain about that one IGN video all the time. The one where they said Sonic was never good. They always say IGN hates Sonic and uses that video as evidence. But IGN's like a big corporation with a diverse group of people. I'm pretty sure like at least 2 people there like Sonic. But at the same time, it is crazy that they got 4 random guys in a room, and they started all collectively hating on Sonic. Not one guy there understood the appeal of Sonic. No one understood why the fans, despite the game qualities diminishing, would hold on to the franchise hoping it would get better. So yeah, while I still think talking about that video is stupid, I can understand why people would latch onto it and hate it so much. There's this tweet that got popular within the fan base. It's a guy saying that he played Crush 40 music at his school and everyone was low-key vibing to it until they found out it was from Sonic. And then a bunch of people came out sharing their experiences about being a Sonic fan. People were fearing that the world was against Sonic, and that IGN video confirmed that fear. It's a non-productive but also very human reaction. IGN brought it upon themselves. Sorry that your actions have consequences, guys. Oh wait, that reminds me, SammyClassicSonicFan and Chris Chan. Yeah, apparently these two people represent the entire fanbase. I mean, do I even need to explain myself? They freaking don't. There's also the furry problem, I guess, which doesn't really make sense because a lot of people like to cite Lola Bunny as one of their first cartoon crushes. Like, one day we all collectively agreed that Lola Bunny is hot, but suddenly Sonic fans liking Sonic characters is a bad thing? I mean, at this point, the Pokemon fanbase is hornier than the Sonic fanbase towards literal animals. Where's the backlash there? Pokemon is always getting away with things. Chris Chan is a Pokemon fan too, I'm gonna lose it! And the last problem is that Sonic fans make too many recolor OCs. Yeah, that's just stupid. Look, I get they're not really good, but one thing I really like about Sonic fans is that they're really creative. These are just kids exploring their creativity. You have to start from somewhere, and considering this fanbase has a lot of kids, they're not going to start off really great. And even then, there are still a lot of amazing animators and game programmers and artists out there in the fanbase. Sonic inspires creativity unlike any other franchise I've seen, and I can't believe we've been put down for embracing that inspiration. Sure, it's a little cringy at the beginning, but that's no reason to hate. Just like people discourage Sonic Team to get creative with their stories, with their gameplay, they also discourage the fanbase from being creative too. Like, that's actually kinda messed up, don't you think? I think it kind of highlights how people lack creativity. Look, I love Scott the Waz. He's actually really awesome in his Sonic tier list video. He said a lot of things I agreed with, but one thing I couldn't agree with was his opinion on Sonic and the Black Knight. He says that when he thinks about Sonic, he thinks about this sharp buzzsaw, which is true. He spins around and his spikes, you know, he does all the buzzsawy things. But that was the reason why he said Sonic couldn't use a sword, because it comes off as redundant. And I disagree. Sonic and the Black Knight wasn't a good game, but I don't think there isn't a good game waiting to be made. You can guard from attacks with the sword. It provides a wider attack range. Sure, Sonic could defeat these enemies himself, but remember, he's also using his own body to do that. I don't think it's a preposterous idea that he decides to take the load off his body for once. Plus, the knight aspect ties in well with the story the game's trying to tell. Similar thing is said about Shadow the Hedgehog. Why does he need to use a gun? Sure, Shadow could kill these guys on his own, but there are a lot of guys to kill. Like, yeah, I could probably beat up 50 kids, but, you know, I'd rather use an AK. At the end of the day, we make games. We create the rules for them. You have to implement the right rules to make a good game, and people don't realize that. They act like these ideas are inherently bad. People lack whimsy, and they'll praise like the safest thing imaginable, like Sonic Colors or Sonic 4 Episode 1. Sonic's biggest enemy is boring people that act better for being wrong. Like, it actually comes to show how immature people can be. Now, obviously the internet is anonymous, maybe all these people are kids. But then you have people like I Hate Everything who perpetuate the stigma even further. Like, he's a grown-ass man, leave us alone. I actually watched his review on the Sonic movie, and he said that the Sonic movie Sonic was a perfect adaptation of the game Sonic. Like, how is he allowed to have an opinion? What? And this all comes back to me and Sonic. This negative attitude that everyone had towards Sonic made me develop some insecurities about him. I'm chilling nowadays, like, now that I'm an adult, people are more mature so they don't say stupid things. And I think Sonic has gained a lot more popularity recently as well. But at the end of the day, those experiences I had were during a time when my brain was developing. I was conditioned to fear talking about my favorite franchise. That makes no sense. But yeah, after thinking about all this recently, I've just decided I'll try to be more open about it. Sonic was an important part of my childhood, so if you can't understand why I like Sonic, then I feel like you're failing to understand a vital part of who I am as a person. And if you refuse to understand, then that's just a lack of maturity on your end. Okay, that's the end of the video. Goodbye.